Well, hello, everyone.
Hi,
It's good to be here.
good to be here. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Today, we're super excited to spend time with Jana Benitez. Lately, I've been coming up with one-word introductions for the guest. And the word today would be depth. Depth in meaning, depth in pursuits. You know, being in your studio, seeing your work, talking to you, there's definitely a lot of depth and many layers. It's fascinating. Hope to peel some of those back today. And that depth is exemplified in this quote from a February 2023 article in Tatler Magazine, where you said, "We don't make art, it comes from within us." You were dubbed a wonder kid when you debuted in a solo show at age 12 in the
Ayala.
Thank you, Museum in Metro Manila.
Yes.
And then another solo show at age 14 at the Walter
Wickiser.
Gallery in New York City. Thanks for that. And fast forward to today, and you're dividing time between various studios in the United States while exhibiting across continents. Having studied numerous art schools until finishing your MFA, and you're a roster artist at the Pearl Lam Galleries in Hong Kong. Today, we're going to learn more about where your inspiration comes from and what you're working on now. And if you're watching from YouTube, which some people will, they'll see that we're in your studio today. So they'll get a glimpse as to what's happening here.
Cool.
So for context, tell us what first made you embrace art?
I was lucky enough to have parents that really supported me in the love of art. I think I was not unlike many kids, just constantly doodling and drawing with, crayons and pastels and whatever I could get my hands on. But I just happened to be drawing and painting, all over the living room at my parents' Philippine home. So we would go to the Philippines in the summers and grew up in New York City during the school year. And so I was in the Philippines and just making a big mess with giant pieces of paper everywhere and drawing. And I was 11 at the time. And a friend of the family came over for dinner, and I was getting yelled at actually for not cleaning up. And they were like, "Wow, look at this," and liked the drawings that I was doing and the paintings that I was doing, and asked me if I wanted to have a show. And I didn't really know what that meant. It was like, "Do you want to have a birthday party or something?" So I was like, "Sure, great," and I didn't know what that meant, and then slowly learned what that meant, and perhaps still learning. And so I made like 30 little paintings of faces. It started out that way, just drawing my friends, my family, people around me, often from life, almost exclusively just looking. I didn't have that terminology, but in retrospect. And then being encouraged so young to be showing, these things that I was doing that I didn't necessarily put value on. I enjoyed making stuff. I enjoyed making marks, but I wasn't thinking of them as artwork or paintings. And then having people recognize them as such has been a very wild ride. But that's how I started to get into that side of it. And then also my family, my dad painted as a hobby. Every 10 years he would joke, among other things. And my brother sort of steeped in art history as an academic. And so I would go to museums a lot and around artists a lot, I guess, through my parents. Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, were you painting in color, black and white, pencil? What was your medium?
I actually had a 12 set of soft pastels before my first show. And then after that opening, my dad, as a gift, gave me a 24 set. And it sounds like a funny thing, but like that doubles, that doubles the starting point, so that was just like mind boggling. And then I think at every juncture, just like the shift in tools was so impactful, And then, since then I've had different games of constraints of using less color and more color. And, it's been a dance with that, but that's how I started out.
Today, are you in more color, less color, or where are you
I'm
at
currently
today?
just stepping out of like a 3-month, it's almost like a fast, where people like, do things with a diet that they consume to their body. Like I did a limited palette using 3 tubes of paint, like a white, brown, and red, just to return to form and really pay attention to the touch, the brush stroke, the speed, like viscosity and wetness. So like the sensual elements of the paint. Just, I mean, I say just, but it was 2 years ago. But I work in like a giant body of work for several years at a time. So in my mind, I just finished a show because I'm in the gestation and emerging period into a new bodies of work. And so I just finished a show that was a lot of bright colors. It was gestural abstraction based on somatic awareness in the body. So, big fancy words to basically say, what am I feeling? What am I feeling in the body, at the body level, where in the body, and how can I visualize that? How can I visualize joy and elation or contraction? Really playing with this sensation of contraction and expansion.
And are you illustrating those on the same piece of artwork in one way or another? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
in some ways, visualizing that tension. It's interesting though. Your question reminds me of an observation that someone said, because another framework for the work that I was making is intuition and really visualizing our intuitive sense, and especially like the gut, the kind of, the French call it sometimes the second brain, or the Chinese call the dantian hara. So visualizing like almost as if some of these larger vertical paintings was the energy field of a human body, particularly their torso, and then the lower half of the painting was like their gut, or their dantian energy center, and this intuitive energy like rising up from it. But anyway, back to the point is that somebody made the observation like, oh well, when we check in with our intuition, it can say yes or no. We see a lot of this yes feeling in your paintings. Is there a no feeling? And that was so interesting. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like fun. So I think that I just unknowingly painted a lot of that like yes feeling, that kind of surge. But it would be interesting. What would the painting look like to capture that feeling of nope. I don't know that I've attempted that yet.
Well, you mentioned energy, and if I did debate a little bit on a word. Depth was the one that I selected, but energy was the other close parallel for you, because you definitely have energy and it resonates in your work for sure. And for those people that can't see the studio, your panels, your paintings are not small. They're large. And so this one over here that we can see, what size is that? Probably
5 feet by 6 feet.
5 by 6. Yeah. How do you pick the size?
Oh, that's a great question. I like to work in a similar size for a while, and really understand that proportion. And I started out with that size vertical because it, again, is a parallel of the human body. So it's roughly like our wingspan in width. And then, I mean, I'm definitely not 6 feet, but it's around like a human sort of proportion in height, just a little larger than, like, I would say, depending on the average. But so standing in front of it when it's raised off the floor, you can kind of feel as if you're standing in front of something that matches you in scale. It's a human scale. And then having a lot of those, around, I like to sort of play with it horizontally and see what world that can create. And then I also really like to work a lot bigger. It's just a matter of being able to work on less of those at the same time. But what I love about the larger ones is that you can really lose yourself in it, and the physicality of the strokes of the movement, dance, and not so much as performance, but as movement, sensual movement, meditative movement, moving through emotions, like different dance practices have become more meaningful to me in the last decade. That allows the body to come into these kind of depictions of embodiment. Something about size that I never forgot is an artist visiting at grad school once challenged me to make a giant painting that was very intimate and a tiny painting that felt monumental. So that's an ongoing.
How was that?
Ongoing.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. Yeah.
So you've just finished, or you finished a show and a certain amount of work, and now you're moving into something else. Describe your work a little bit of what you just exhibited.
So the Wild Silence show that I began describing, that was at the Pearl Lam Galleries in Hong Kong, and also she also has a gallery in Shanghai. And that so the title of the show, Wild Silence, I chose based on quieting the noise from the externals and falling inwards as a means of waking up to the sensations in the body. I had previously spent a number of years studying various healing modalities that deal with the body. So it, in terms of contraction at the cell level, at the body level, there's so much that happens that we don't even necessarily think about, like our digestive system, or like a tightening in the stomach, or the throat, or our shoulders lift up, and when we fall in love, the flutters, the butterflies, all these different things. And so one of the major investigations that I've been interested in through my art practice is how to really return to the body and honor the wisdom in the body, its capacity for change and alchemy, what we carry in terms of memory, and memory at the individual level, but also at the collective level. So, and there's, so many great researchers, scholars, writers, scientists that are really looking at that more now, pulling from ancient traditions and cutting edge new science. And so, yeah, another way of languaging that body of work and that investigation is through this mechanism of fight, flight, freeze. Now there's fawn, and it's constantly being honed and tweaked or expanded, but generally we're all familiar with this idea that, like, to survive, we have this fight, flight, freeze. And so a working title that I played around with for that show was Pause, Stay, Soften, and really thinking about that exact moment when we're triggered and we want to go into our defensive mechanisms. We don't want to necessarily. It's happening.
Right.
It's happening within milliseconds. And the training of, like, taking a breath and pausing and staying instead of running away, and opening, softening, breathing, suspending reaction for a moment instead of getting into combat, is tremendously powerful. It's in some sense, it's through that, it's at that level of, it's at that register that I make sense of much larger events, like history, war, peace, political and social issues, social justice issues. I mean, all of the big, quote unquote, big themes and issues happen, are being discussed by humans as far as the dialogues that I'm a part of. We commune with nature in our own ways, but the verbal language, conversations and discourse is a conversation between humans, and those humans have bodies, and those bodies are registering things on so many different levels, alongside the verbal conversation. And so, in terms of somatic abolitionism is another thing that really resonates with me. Like, the trauma, whatever it is, exists at the body level. Anyway, I can go on for hours, but so that's that. So that was that body of work. Yeah.
So you finished with that exhibit, and now you're underway with some work that, when I came and met with you, we talked about some, and I believe that this piece here on the wall is part of that new work that you're into, as well as the historical piece up on the wall. Can you touch on that some for us?
Yes. It's interesting to look at it now that I'm looking at it. It's a work in progress, actually, and it almost feels like a raw nerve in its current state. This is a project that I began researching in 2018, though in some ways was already gestating internally for many years before that. And it's quite a long stretch for me. Wow. So it's been 6 years. I'm usually a lot quicker to have an idea and get it onto canvas. This one has been a lot slower, and it's still really just beginning to take shape. And I think the reason for that is because it's very delicate. I find the way of going about it very delicate, and I guess I'll describe it first before. So I'm drawing from archival imagery from 1904 and 1905 in the World's Fair, when the United States, just after the Louisiana Purchase, a few years after the Filipino-American War, the U.S. actually purchased the Philippines from Spain for $20 million. And there was a lot of... Anyhow, I was about to try to synopsize the war, and that's too difficult a historic context for me, but to try to explain right now. But basically, 1,200 Filipinos were taken from the Philippines, were brought from the Philippines to the United States and displayed as spectacle, as a kind of flex of the colonies, the territory, their territories. So this archival imagery is very difficult to look at for almost anyone. It feels very heavy. And
so these natives,
yes,
native Filipinos,
yes,
were brought here and basically put on display.
Yes, zoo. The term human zoos has been thrown around. I mean, it's very much like a kind of an exoticized othering. They were kind of on spectacle. Mm-hmm. They were at times also asked to do ceremonial things that are outside of the context and frequency of ceremony, kind of doing things every day, and sort of caricatured and put into a spectacle. But anyhow, I can talk about that event at length. But in terms of my artistic practice, what I'm currently interested in is how to basically journey from those images to... this is a big one. It's going to be a big gap. But like, if you just imagine starting there and somehow all the way on this other end, getting to a genuine embodied feeling of love, or at the very least peace. And by that, I mean allowing for what arises in the body in response to the images, not putting it away, not denying it, really allowing for the unlocking. My sense of it, how I would kind of narrate my own practice and experience, is I'm unlocking emotions that I feel, and also that are in the collective consciousness, that exist almost like matter in a landscape. Like I'm going to the place, and I'm unlocking these feelings, in particular in the Filipino-American consciousness, but also in the American consciousness, in the human consciousness, in the more collective experience at large. So unlocking these feelings, and then through painting, exploring various means of transforming or reconciling, or even just the search for which verb happens. It's like, how do you get from A to B? So transforming that into love, or reconciling that in such thinking it through, so like, is it intellectual? Is it cultural? Is it spiritual? And so, for example, the pieces are not here because they were shown at Art Basel Hong Kong a couple years ago, but one way that I did that was painting the same image 4 times that was mimicking, echoing and honoring the Hawaiian reconciliation system called Ho'oponopono, which has 4 mantras, and it's, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And so in that system, in my cursory understanding of it and admiration of it, that you relate to things as if it is you. There's not a separation between one's inner life and one's outer life, and there's total agency and total connection. And therefore, I would imagine looking at this image and saying those 4 things to every single person in that image. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And really recognizing that in that way, everyone suffered, everyone suffered. And so, and I mean, this is the all like, I mean, Rick, you're very good at sort of getting me to unfold and peel back these layers, because this is the kind of thing that ideally, I mean, hopefully as these paintings progress, I'm not going to be saying any of this stuff. I mean, this is a one-time sneak, because I really don't want the intellectual discourse to precede the work itself. But these are the things that I'm thinking about, but I'm also totally surrendering to the painting process and letting, now that I've had all this, perhaps this is why it's taken so many years. I have all this thought, but then the painting process will humble you. It will not allow you to come in guns a-blazing, pedantically just sort of assuming to know anything at all. So in a lot of ways, I'm like burning up my own, like there's no faking it, like I see these images and I have been like, hysterically crying for hours. I felt rage. I felt all these different things, but I have to kind of actually get to the point where the goal that I've set out, I haven't yet achieved. Like I have ideas of how to get to that loving space, but because I personally don't feel excited at a personal level in terms of putting out my anger in, and especially in any kind of finger pointing narrative. So like a no blame, nonviolent lineage is like deeply important to me.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with difficult history? More generally, it doesn't have to be this specific event, but more generally, the question is, how do you deal with very difficult histories without turning your gaze, without shirking away from it, while taking on that responsibility, but not collapsing under the weight of it, nor reifying some us and them story about the bad guys and the good guys, or the bad guys and the victims, and the poor, the perpetrators and the poor victims, So,
well, I see that, and what I really admire is the reconciliation piece that you're really working on, which sort of stepping away. Thank you for sharing those raw thoughts. Is much appreciated. What or how do you think, or when did you make the first connection between cause and colors and shapes? And was that a specific moment you can remember? Do you understand my question?
Again?
The connection between the cause and the work that you wanted to put out. When did that first happen, and how did that come about?
The purpose or the why? The cause is what?
The cause would be so your historical connection with the Filipino being brought here, and then they've been misrepresented, and then you're trying to reconcile that. Was there a time when you were 11 years old, you started painting and you had something you wanted to tell people through your art? You see where I'm at now?
It's so interesting what grappling with this question reveals about my relationship to painting. It's almost unfathomable to me, like the question. I'm stunted by it, and what I learned through observing that is there are so many different levels and layers of knowing. Perhaps that's like why you picked up on this like feeling of depth, which is, it's interesting. That's in like kind of a qualitative adjective, but it's actually like quite literal. Like there are different layers of register and different layers of like unknowingness. And the place where I go to as I'm working, especially now as an adult, unlike when I was, a kid making some drawings, is not the same register as the concept of a cause. It's so, if that makes sense. Like it's not like like a one-to-one in which, the nonviolence can be applied in this way, and what color would I use, and and orange would be like this Buddhist robes or something. Like there's a whole bunch of kind of referential, an orbit of reference. But yeah, I don't know if I can locate a kind of genesis. Yeah.
So exhibiting, where you're painting now? What's your schedule for exhibiting or going forward?
Right now is a really exciting moment because it's perhaps the first time in decades, 25 years maybe, that I have nothing on the horizon, very, very deliberately so. That's not even entirely true because I have, Art Basel in March, and then probably a solo show at Pearl Lam Galleries again next year or the year after. And I'm in conversation with some folks in New York, and there'll be a show in New York coming up. But I deliberately pushed everything away for this year going into next year, and also postponed a museum show at Pinto Museum in Manila because I really want to like melt into the practice to kind of like, I mean, to say like some sort of like death and rebirth is like way too dramatic, but I really want to like break down it. A good analogy is like burning the fields, like
Mm.
I'm burning the fields, and I'm just like, I have this hunger for this deeper feeling of like finding my voice, as cliched as that sounds. And I am so excited to really let myself have that time and space and not have any pressures, no commissions, like I kind of set it up so I was really focused on like career things and buying time basically. So I bought myself a couple years. I bought myself a couple years of like running all the studios and just sort of like having all the materials I need to just play and come at it differently, integrate things that are meaningful to me. And yeah. That's where I'm at. So that's
Mm.
where I'm at.
Mm.
I'm. It's a really fun moment. It's really fun to be in Maine, and this season I was with a bunch of artists yesterday in Portland, and they were laughing about like air kissing the trees, and everyone's a little bit drunk with just the season because you
Yes.
you work
Yes.
for it through the winter.
Yeah. And if you're
And
listening, we might have some noises because we're out of studio, technically in your studio.
right,
And it's a day when the motorcycles are out. So,
sure.
yeah.
I'm going up to Castine to do an artist residency in a week, I think, with Tessa Green O'Brien, who's an amazing artist and curator. Another very close friend, Mira Krishnan, is coming in a couple of days from the Philippines, and she and I used to hang out and paint in my dad's backyard, like when we were with teenagers, and so, yeah, there's like just really good conversations and community. I also am part of the One Dance Portland community, like the larger sort of Five Rhythms community. And one of my really close friends, Deirdre, just passed away. And I'm not sure why I feel to mention this, but I guess there's a real awareness of the power of community, and I'm curious about how that might come into my work. I guess clearing the decks is really allowing me to open up to whatever happens. I'm really just opening it up. I'm like starting some printmaking projects. I'm doing plein air painting. I'm painting outside with a field easel. And I'm inviting people that inspire me and doing these little gatherings where we're taking photographs and videos of people in movement and in dance. And so there are lots of snippets brewing, and I'm really being guided by the feeling of depth, the feeling of pathos, of depth of connection and vitality, aliveness, and letting all of the mental, intellectual ideas, not ignoring them, but like putting them on the back burner for a little bit.
That's not easy to do.
It's not. It's not. It takes a long time, and it's a practice. And nature helps tremendously. These like gorgeous hikes in the ocean, and also, I appreciate you saying that, because I think that to be practical about sort of the nuts and bolts of it, I mean, it's a lot to support oneself financially as an artist, and the psychological space that it takes up when you have an obligation, when you have a gallery show, when you have a commission, when you have just meetings or whatever. Like it takes up a lot of, and so everything that I'm describing, it feels really, to me, it feels really open and joyful and fun. and almost like easy, you know, like an effortlessness, but it takes so much work to get to that effortlessness. You know, it takes months of setting up the studio, of getting everything on wheels, of getting all the materials, of affording all of that, of, you know, finding people that contacting collectors that want giant commissions and then deciding which ones to do. Cause I usually try to limit it to like between 1 and 4 big commissions a year. Cause I don't want to do, I love doing that. And I'm so grateful for those opportunities. And also they take a lot out of me. I just did a huge one to a private client in Costa Rica on this really amazing development project. Yeah, that was like a month of it was wild because I was in the dead of winter here in Maine, and I was just imagining like Guanacaste and like, you know, this tropical jungle, and it was quite fun.
We all should have been here during that time in January to get a little Costa Rican vibe.
Greenhouse, yeah.
Yeah, no, but it's hard to step away from all the logistics to try to free your mind. And like you say, especially if you're solo. Yeah, although you have lots of how does your art get out there?
Well, my gallerist Pearl Lam shows my work through solo shows and also through art fairs, Monte Carlo, Shanghai, Vespo, or Art Singapore. I do some group shows here and in New York, and I've had some solo shows in New York, but a while back, because I'm really wanting to find a domestic, you know, gallerist in the United States that, you know, works well with Pearl on the one hand, sort of the international balance, but and also just like is a really good match energetically, you know. And it's funny because like I've just decided to like consider this journey like really fun, and a lot of artists are like, oh, it's hard, you know, there's a lot of things that have been said or could be said about the art world, and I've just decided to have it be like full of humanity and integrity and like really fun and have things be in a really good way. And if things don't feel right or feel sharp elbowed or feel like competitive in any way, I just go the other direction, which sounds funny because one would think that you want to make, I guess what I'm really recognizing is that one can have excellence without having like a cutthroat competition. And I'm really uninterested in that aspect. I'm like profoundly positioned against that concept. I have found that artists are supporting artists, like just, you know, really, really like propelling each other and personally at the painting level, at the level of like, well, what happens with this medium and what, you know, at the very technical geeky oil painting level. And also like I've started to buy the work of my friends, and I've been inspired by other artists that do that. And it's amazing because it's like you sell a painting and then it's like, well, can I really spend a few $1,000s to buy art? Like this is not in the budget, you know, this is ridiculous, but it feels good. It feels good. It feels good to be kind of in this mode of abundance, you know?
Yes, yeah. It's a freedom, I think, you know, a letting go of the angst and being able to be open to the good works of other people and other things.
And oriented around beauty and around like, yeah, the indescribable kind of like magic of whatever you get from a work of art that inspires you. And faith, I think. Faith and trust in some ways. There's a certain kind of trust. Yeah.
You're in a big world. And I say that you're in the art world, but you're also you have a great reach. And for somebody who's thinking about entering into art or something, who might struggle to open their mind up to possibilities, what advice would you give to them? I've talked about, you know, living in a small world and not opening your mind to other possibilities. You thinking small does the world no good is kind of what's behind that. How would you encourage somebody who's just picking up a paint and brush now? Is it vision? Is it future pacing? Was it exposure that you had in your life that helped you to see this big world that you're in?
You know, this your question reminds me of this funny thing, this funny moment. So I was going around to. Can I come at it in a roundabout way?
You answered how you want.
Yeah. So I was going to some galleries with Alice Walton, who is one of my collectors and also founded the museum where I did this artist in residency at Crystal Bridges Museum. in 2018, and she was introducing me to Robert Goff, this like director, and we were doing the studio visit and going to the galleries all day. And she was like, Jana is emerging, like established, like she couldn't decide like what to name me, you know. And and I thought, and I laugh. I was laughing about this was like, you know, some years back, and I was thinking like I like identified as like a groundhog. It's like I came out and then I was like, "Wah!" I like went back in the ground. And like every year I like come out, I'm like, not yet, you know. And so like I had a funny trajectory in the sense that it wasn't being in a small world and aiming for a bigger world. You know, it was in some ways sort of being thrown into a world that was bigger than what I could handle in whatever way for whatever reason. Not to say like my own work or my own career, but just like I the sensation of being like overwhelmed, you know, like I mean I had a solo show every year that I was a teen, like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, which is crazy. I mean, I
Crazy.
don't even know what to make of it. I don't.
Yeah, like that would be like going to the Olympics.
It was
every year.
it was very strange, you know, and it didn't necessarily make for. I later really worked on making better work. But back to your question, I think that alignment and congruency with one's like purpose and with like one's energy. I don't want it to be vague, but like a certain kind of seeking and reaching and being and daringness is important, you know. And I've had really great mentors that have like a level of audacity. I don't necessarily. I question. I feel really grateful to be alive on this planet in this moment in time, and I feel like there are a lot of movements and a lot of collective efforts at doing the big timeout and really pausing and questioning the collective notions of success and so like this bigger world or whatever we think we're aiming at, you know. I think that existing in such a way that one's practice and what you're doing, what you're making, and who you're showing it to, and how you're getting your work out there, and how you're handling it all, like can all feel good. Not in a hedonist way, but in the way of like of alignment, you know, in a kind of Taoist way of like the water finds the right way down the mountain, you know. Like you can find your right way, and it doesn't matter if somebody like let go of the fears or the voices of it perhaps being described as slower or faster than anyone else, or like better or worse than anyone else, you know. I think that, you know, it's just like it's I think again it moves back to this like philosophical sense of like singularity and vitality, and like it's like a plant is not trying to be better than the other tree, you know. Like it is part of the ecosystem. It just like it knows that, you know. And so like really kind of allowing the wisdom of the natural world, you know, like allowing like for that wisdom, you know. And each tree, you know, trees can't grow well in each other's shadow, but it doesn't mean that they're at odds with each other. They're in competition with each other, you know. So
right.
I don't know if that
Right.
did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had
Sorry,
suggested.
I have another.
Yeah,
Sorry, I wanted
go for
to
it.
kind of simplify it because you really asked, well, do you have advice for somebody in terms of expanding their world and also like their reach or how they work? And I think also letting elation and finding the passion, finding the edge, and letting this like obsession or elation. I'm just thinking of like people or artists or paintings or even just like in my personal life, people that have been really inspiring, and the way that can light things up, and having no bounds to that. So that when somebody inspires you and you don't, it doesn't even make sense, just like following that and just allowing for the obsession, you know, letting it be almost pathological, you know, letting oneself be really obsessive and not understand, and then using that passion to guide what that means. Where does the painting end up? It could end up on a mural at, you know, a sports stadium because you want to see your own painting every time that you watch that sport. I mean, it doesn't matter, you know. You can go rock climbing and whatever. It's just like whatever. It will allow for the kind of unconventional path that ultimately we all need to carve out for ourselves.
Great. We had touched a little bit about family history and servanthood and how that influenced your work and your art. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, what I can say about so I mean so both of my brothers are in government in the Philippines, and sometimes I'll like be on the phone with one of with Kiko, and I'm at the studio at like 3 in the morning here, and I'm just like trying to figure out like which shade of yellow to use, and he's like, oh, sorry, like I'm on the Congress floor, we're passing a bill on plastic, or we just changed the age of statutory rape, or these like big issues that are like affecting policy. And sometimes it's like, whoa, like what am I doing with my life? Like it can feel very difficult to maintain a feeling of like what you do matters, but it also is really awesome to have that opportunity to be like, yes, it does, and here's why, to kind of refine that, and to not ignore like that there are incredible things that people are doing on different like planes, and also that one can bring that same level of intention and urgency, and I have a sculptor friend, and his girlfriend is an ER doctor, and and we would have similar conversations where he would get home and her stories was like saving someone's life, and it was very difficult for him to be like, well, I got another layer of resin on the big piece.
I finished the nose today.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, what? Exactly. So
that could have been Michelangelo.
right. Yep.
Mm.
Exactly. Yeah, and also recognizing that because of visual cultural history, as I begin to kind of dare to kind of speak to my history in the Philippines and like my experiences, and sort of address those themes more directly, that it does become a part of a conversation that is quite small, and it is doing something in relation to the country. And so I guess I grew up with a feeling of like my dad grew up with this sense of like, what are you going to do for the nation? Like, what are you going to do for the country? Let alone, the very concept of nationhood is being questioned, and rightfully so. But he, he was a real patriot in that sense. And I often feel a tremendous amount of guilt in not living in the Philippines, even though I was born and raised in New York City. But I would go back every year, and I constantly feel guilty about not being there. But in some ways, that is also fuel for more fodder for the practice, how to make sense of that yearning. In a lot of ways, my nuclear family self-exiled in 1986, and there's a lot of, so with my lens of ancestral trauma and ancestral history, it's interesting, like sometimes I feel like I'm working through some of those unfelt feelings and experiences that my father carried, and certainly the generations above him in different ways, being displaced or moved around. And yeah, this kind of themes of belonging get to kind of come in less overt ways.
Fascinating. Is there anything that you might like to add that I haven't asked?
I don't think so.
And how would people reach out to you, or how would people find out about you? What's the best? Is it Instagram? Is it your website, or any other suggestions?
Yeah, website and Instagram, janabenitez.com. Instagram is Jana Benitez _art. We actually might do a group show here in this space this fall, which will be fun. Yeah, we're going to curate some great contemporary young artists. And,
neat.
Yeah.
Artists from around here, or
a bit of a mix. New York, Maine.
Great.
Maybe some international, but mostly, mostly around here.
Fun. Yeah, if anybody hasn't seen your work or been in the studio, it's full of life. It's full of energy.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, for sure. And I can't thank you enough for the time and answering my sometimes challenging questions. I didn't mean them to be.
No, that's great.
And great job. And
did I miss any of them?
No,
I think I got them
not
all.
at all. Yeah, you got them. And for the inspiration that you provide to folks. And it's just great to sit down with someone who, when you look at a flat piece of medium or canvas with color on it, and is so much depth to it. And it's always fun to find out more about it. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.